Hi, Kate from the Narrate team here. This weekend, Caleb kicks off a brand new series called Drift. He engages us in the importance of emotional health and how God invites us on a journey to transform and renew our minds.
So this weekend, we are starting a brand new series called Drift, really hoping each week to explore areas in our life where we have a tendency to head south, to head in a negative direction. And that really, in order for us to stop drifting in our marriage and our finances, in order for us to stop drifting as a parent in our relationships and our friendships, that we really have to come to a point in our life where we have to pound a stake into the ground and say, okay, you know what, enough drifting. It's decision time. That in order for us to stop drifting, we've got to take that rock and slam it on the shuffling pieces of paper and say, okay, enough drifting. It's time to do some hard work, and it's time to get well. And this morning, what I would love to do with you guys is to begin a conversation about, in order for us to stop drifting in the many areas of our lives, in order to make sure that next time will be better than last time, we have to begin to think differently. In fact, we have to begin to look at our mind and how we're thinking, and we have to begin to ask questions like, what am I thinking, and why am I thinking that way? Have you guys ever made a decision, a choice in your life where you're like, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? You guys ever do that? Where you make a decision, you make a choice, and it turns out bad. It turns out the way that you thought it wouldn't turn out. And you're like, really? Like, I thought that would happen if I did that. Like, what in the world was I thinking? If you're anything like me, then you've asked yourself that question lots of times, right? I think we can all think back on our lives, instances, and think of those times when we're just like, oh, I have no clue what I was thinking. Why did I do that? And so as you begin to think of some of those instances in your life, I will tell you one of my instances where I asked myself that question. So it was about 3 years ago. Before I started working at Narrate, I used to build furniture for a living. And I got connected with these interior designers in Denver. And so they would most often have me ship the furniture to them. But there was some occasions, some instances when shipping wasn't doable because there was too much of that, or too much furniture, because the deadline was too close and shipping couldn't meet it. And so then I would deliver the furniture to them. And so this instance happened to where I had to deliver the furniture to them. And the deadline was Friday afternoon. At 12 o'clock, it had to be there. All the furniture had to be in Denver. And so Thursday afternoon rolls around, and I still hadn't left to Denver to deliver the furniture. In fact, I was still working on the furniture, trying to finish the last pieces. And so I finally finish all the pieces of furniture at 10 o'clock that night. I load all the furniture into the truck and the trailer, and I leave to Denver at 11:30 that night. And those of you that have ever traveled from Helena to Denver know that it takes 12 hours to get there. And that's clipping along pretty good. That's, not doing potty breaks every hour, stretching. Like, that's like going there, and no sightseeing. That's just headed there. And so the trip didn't start out well for me because I didn't have much room for error. And then to make things worse, I was tired. I had been working long hours that week and worked a long day that day. And so things just weren't well when I started the trip. But I make it to Billings. And I'm feeling pretty good. But those of you that have ever traveled past Billings to Denver know that once you make it past Billings, there is nothing out there, is there? It's like absolute desolate. Like, it's worse than Butte. That's the only way I know how to describe it. There's just nothing there. And I'm the type of person that when I drive, I like to kind of feel like I'm in like a race car driver. So I like the curves and like the turning and the hills. But when you make it past Billings, like, you just drive straight and you look at nothing. And it's so boring. And I get bored fast. And so So I make it about 5 o'clock that morning, driving in the middle of who knows where in Wyoming, and I notice that I have the windows rolled down and my head out the window like a dog trying to stay awake, and I'm listening to Michael Jackson, okay? And a little bit about me, if I'm listening to Michael Jackson, I should be grooving and dancing and like happy, but because you just cannot dance and groove when MJ is on, right? And I wasn't doing none of that. I was nodding off driving to Michael Jackson, so I knew I was in trouble. And so I finally make it to somewhere in Wyoming to this gas station, cafe, diner-like place and decide that I need to pull over and wake myself up. And so I go into this diner place and sit down, order a cup of coffee to go, and I'm drinking a glass of water. And have you ever got that feeling where you're so tired that you're delusional? You ever been there? So I was at that point there, and I was delusional. And when I get delusional, I begin talking to myself. That's what it looks like when I'm delusional. And so I begin talking to myself, things like, okay, Caleb, you really got a problem here. I was like, yep, I sure do. Because, Caleb, you need to make it to Denver. And, Caleb, you can barely keep your eyes open right now. And there's a deadline. You've got a ways to go. And I was like, yeah, this is not good. And I was like, Caleb, you can't take a nap because you have no room for error. I was like, yep. And I was like, okay, Caleb, here's the thing. The only problem here is that you can't keep your eyes open. Let's forget about you being tired because, Caleb, you can man up. And you cannot be tired. The only problem here is that you can't keep your eyes open. I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. So I'm like, hey, is it duct tape to open the eyes? Is it toothpicks? How am I going to keep my eyes open? And at that moment, I see a thing of Tabasco sauce sitting on the table. And I instantly think to myself, aha, brilliant idea, Caleb, brilliant. And so I take the thing of Tabasco sauce. Remember, I'm delusional at this point. Take the thing of Tabasco sauce and I make sure that no one's looking around because what I'm about to do is a little bit out there. And I open my eye and I tilt my head and I pour Tabasco sauce in my eye. Delusional, remember. And let me just tell you, as soon as that drop hit my eyeball, I have never felt so fully and painfully alive in my life. Oh my goodness. I don't know how to explain it to you. Basically, it was exhilarating. That's the only word I know. And evidently, I did not think about that. I have nerves connected to my eyeball that are connected to the rest of my body. Because when that drop hit my eyeball, it was like fire going throughout my whole body. It was like people were injecting Tabasco sauce in my veins and everywhere. It was so painful. And as soon as that drop hit my eyeball, I instantly asked myself the question, Caleb, what were you thinking? Caleb, I know you're delusional, but really Tabasco sauce in the eye? Come on. But to finish the story, I did make it to Denver alive, and I got out of the truck, and the guy was waiting for me, and I got out, and he's like, dude, what happened to your face? I was like, what? Because my left eye was bright red, bloodshot, fiery looking, and my right eye, it was closed. It was tired. It was done for. I was like, I don't know, medical, science, something. But what about you? You ever make a decision, make a choice, where you're like, what in the world was I thinking? You ever make a choice, make a decision in your life, and it turns out horrible? It turns out damaging, hurting you? Everybody told me not to move in with her. Everybody told me I was just another girl on his checklist. Sure enough, I was. What was I thinking? It was 0% down and no payments for 3 years. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. What was I thinking? Friend came to me about an investment and said if I put this much money down, then I'd get 30% return. I mean, it was almost too good to be true. And my dad always told me if it's too good to be true, then it's too good to be true. Sure enough, it was too good to be true. What was I thinking? I should have studied harder, shouldn't have gone to so many parties, shouldn't have hung out with this group of people or that group of people. What was I thinking? See, we all intuitively ask the question, but what was I thinking when things go bad? and when things don't turn out the way that we thought they would turn out, but we never actually pause on that question, do we? We all ask the question, what was I thinking? But we never actually dig deep into that question to come up with some answers. We end up hopping right back into life, and we end up making the same decisions and the same choices, and we get right back into those relationships, and we get right back into debt, and we just keep drifting. And here's the thing about me and you. If you keep thinking the way you used to think, you'll keep doing the things that you used to do. And nothing will ever really change. You'll just keep drifting. And if you're like me, sometimes you can be at a spot in your life where the thought of not changing, the thought of drifting, the thought of not growing and not improving can be a little bit scary, can it? The thought to keep making the same decisions and the same choices can be a little bit frightening. The thought to put Tabasco sauce in your eye again is not appealing. Some of you are at a spot in your life where you don't like where you're at. And quite honestly, some of you don't like you. And it's not that other people don't like you. It's that you don't like you. It's that you've become a you that not even you like. And what you've done is you've created a life that looks good on the outside, but it's so painful on the inside. And for me and for everybody else, it looks like your life is going great. And you even recognize that compared to the majority of the world, like your life is going great. I mean, when you think about it, you have a great job, and the job has lots of opportunity to grow and to learn and improve, and it allows you to make enough money to provide for yourself. You have a house, you have a reliable vehicle, there's vacation on the way. You have a great group of friends that you can hang out with on a Friday night and laugh and share memories. You have a great family. You have a spouse, sure, that they get on your nerves sometimes, but you love them. You have kids, and sure, they annoy you sometimes, but you care about them. And for me and for everybody else, it looks like your life is going great, that nothing needs to change, that you're living the dream, that however you're drifting about in life, just to keep drifting that way. But if we can be honest with each other this morning, I want to be honest. Some of you have created a life that looks good on the outside, but it's so painful on the inside. This past January, that was exactly where I was at in life. What I discovered about myself was that I had created a life that looked good on the outside, but on the inside, it was so painful and hurtful and damaging. And for everybody else looking at my life, it looked like life was going how I wanted it to go. I mean, I had a great job, had a relationship, had a house, had money to live comfortably, had great friends and community. It looked like nothing needed to change, that I was doing everything right. But when the lights would go down, when I would get by myself, and when I was honest with myself, I didn't like me at all. I didn't like where I was at. I didn't like my thoughts, my emotions, my feelings, the way that I was thinking. And I had felt that way about myself for some time. And for the first time in my life, I began to realize that there was something deep going on inside of me, that there was something deep there. And the memory is so clear for me, because I was sitting on a plane headed back to Helena. It was the week after Christmas. The week after Christmas, the staff usually get some time off. I think we had 5 days off this past Christmas, and so decided to take advantage of that. I love to travel, so I was like, yeah, I'm going to go travel these 5 days. And so my brother and sister-in-law had just moved to San Francisco. I had never been there. I love big cities, experiencing all the culture and food that you can't get in, Helena. And I love people watching, and heard there was a bunch of weirdos down there. So I was like, yeah, I'll go people watching. So I went down there and really designed the trip so that way I could stay busy the whole time, and that I wouldn't have to really think about reality. And so did that, ate a lot of good food, saw a bunch of weird people, saw a bunch of cool sights, and didn't really think until the end of the trip. I got on the plane, And reality set in for me, and the emotions started flooding back. And you know that feeling where you feel all alone, but yet you're surrounded by people? I had that. I was on this plane. I was surrounded by people I didn't know, babies crying, people talking and laughing. The guy right next to me, half of his body weight was on me. You know, it was one of those experiences. But yet I felt so alone. And the emotions and thoughts came to me about reality. And I began to think of anxiety, and I began to have depression and stress and unhappiness with the thought of having to come back to Helena. And that wasn't the first time that I had felt that way about where I was living and what I was doing. And once again, it did not make sense to me. Like why the anxiety, why the stress, why the depression, why the hopelessness? But because Caleb, it doesn't make sense. Because, I mean, Caleb, look at your life. You have a great job. You love getting to be a part of Narrate. You have a great group of friends and community that care and love about you. You love hanging out with them. You have a house. You have enough money to live comfortably. Why the anxiety? Why the unhappiness? And as I began to process all of the thoughts, for the first time I realized that my anxiety, my depression, my unhappiness, I didn't really have anything to do with my circumstances. It didn't have to do with the job I had. It didn't have to do with the city I was living in. It didn't have to do with how much money I had, but it had to do with something deeper. It had to do with something inside. It had to do with my thoughts and my emotions and the things I was thinking. And for the first time in my life, I began to pause down on there. I began to look at what I was thinking. And I began to dig up some answers. I began to think to myself, okay, Caleb, what are you thinking and why are you thinking that way? Because what you're feeling right now, you're tired of feeling that way. And so I just began to dig deep and I paused there. And what I discovered about myself was a little bit shocking. And to be honest, it was a little bit painful. Because what I discovered was that my thoughts, my thinking of anxiety of coming back to Helena had not to do with Helena, but had to do with me not wanting to be known, with me not wanting to have to be vulnerable to my friends and the people that I know in Helena, and the fear that if people actually knew me, if they knew the decisions and the choices that I've made, then they wouldn't accept me, and that they would judge me, and that they would think that I was unlovable, and that my fear of coming back to Helena and working had less to do with the job, but it had more to do with a discontentment issue. And the thought of that the grass is always greener on the other side, that if I just got this job, if I just moved there, then everything would be okay. And as I began to dig deeper into my discontentment mindset, what I discovered and kind of came up with was that makes sense, because that's how I grew up with. That was my parents. My parents were discontent. And growing up, every couple of years, we would move to a new town, to a new city. They would get a new job, and it was if we could just buy this piece of property and do this investment and get this much money back, then everything will be okay. And as I began to process all the things that I was thinking, what I began to realize was that my thinking was leaking into my life. That my thinking and the thoughts that I was having, I realized that they were dictating my decisions and my choices in life. And I love how John Ortberg says it. He says this: the way we live inevitably will be a reflection of how we think. The way that you live inevitably will be a reflection of how you think. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because what we think eventually leaks into our lives, and eventually it affects our decisions and our choices. And if we have unhealthiness in our mind, eventually that affects us. and it comes to surface. If you have a lust problem and you don't address that lust problem, if you just leave that alone, eventually that can lead to porn. And then, you can keep that to yourself for a little bit, but eventually that leaks into your marriage, it leaks into your relationships, and it ends up in disconnection, ends up in divorce and affairs, and the sexual appetite is never fully satisfied. And it's not that you have a porn problem, it's that you have a lust problem. Unhealthiness, thoughts of loneliness, that you'll never get married, that you'll be single the rest of your life, that no one will love you, can lead you to get in unhealthy dating relationships. Relationships that you should never be in, that you shouldn't be in, can make you cross the physical boundaries when you shouldn't be crossing them, because you just want to be loved by someone. And it's not that you have a dating problem, it's that you have an unhealthy mindset that you'll never get married, an unhealthy mindset of loneliness, unhealthy thoughts of money, of greed, of security can lead you to put your career, work above your family. And that can be okay for a little bit, but eventually that leaks into your marriage, into your kids' lives. And when your kids get to be teenagers, when they end up moving out, you have little to no relationship with them. And the way we treat our spouse, the way that we parent, what types of friends we have, what types of relationships we have, are a reflection of how we think. Because see, what makes you is the way that you think. What makes me is the way that I think. And so the question for me and for you is, okay, then how do you make sure that the unhealthy mindset that you can, how do you address that? How do you make sure that the unhealthy thoughts, how do you get rid of those? How do you make sure that those don't leak into your life? How do you stop drifting about in life? How do you not create a life that looks good on the outside, but how do you actually create a life that looks good on the inside? And that day on the plane, I began to ask myself the question, Caleb, how do I become the me that I want to be and the me that I was created and designed to be? How do you become the you that you want to be and the you that you were designed and created to be? How do we make sure that next time is better than last time? How do we stop drifting in our decisions and our choices in life? And as I began to think of all of those things, what I began to discover is that it goes back to the question of what are you thinking and why are you thinking that way, and actually pausing there and digging there with those questions and beginning to come up with some answers, because what makes you is the way that you think. What makes me is the way that I think. And that we actually have to begin to think differently if we want to make sure that next time will be better than last time. And if we want to stop drifting about in life, we have to begin to think differently. And when you open up the pages of the text, from Genesis to Revelation, that's exactly what you read about. You read about a God who invites people after people to begin to think differently and to attune their thinking to his thinking. And there's this guy named Paul that talks about this idea of thinking differently. And I think Paul is so brilliant, and I think you'll discover why in a little bit. But what Paul talks about is that in order to make sure that next time is better than last time, in order for us to stop drifting about in life, we have to begin to think differently. And in order for us to begin to think differently, we have to change, and change always starts in the mind. And so this is what Paul says in Romans. He says this. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. So in other words, don't be like everybody else. Don't conform. Don't drift about in culture like everyone else is drifting. Just because culture says that this is okay and this type of relationship won't hurt you and you can fool around in this area in your life and you can get in debt and there will be no consequences, doesn't mean that that's okay. Just because everyone else is drifting in culture doesn't mean that you should drift. Don't be like everybody else. In other words, I like illustrations, so this might help you. Don't be this guy. Don't be like everybody else. Don't be a cookie cutter where it's next. Sure, the frosting looks different. Sure, it's smiley face, frown face, smiley face, frown face, different eyeballs, but they're all pretty much the same, aren't they? They're cookie cutter. Don't be this guy. And see, being this guy takes no effort in life, does it? Being like everybody else is pretty easy. You can wake up in the morning and be this guy. You can wake up and have no discipline and not work hard and just drift about in culture. And Paul says, don't be that guy. And then he gives us a contrast of what to be. He says this, but be transformed. But be transformed. So don't be this guy. Don't be like everybody else. But I think what Paul is getting at is be one of these guys, right? Or I like this even better. Don't be this guy. But be this guy. Don't be a conformer, but be a transformer. I love this. Does anyone know who this guy is, by the way? Is he a good guy or bad guy? Does no one know? I don't know either. But I think what Paul is saying is, hey, don't be like everybody else, but be different. Be a transformer, not a conformer. And then what Paul says next, he really addresses the question of, okay, how do I not be a conformer, but a transformer? How do I stop drifting about in life? How do I make sure that next time is better than last time? And what Paul says is this. If you want to be transformed, and not be like everybody else, then it's by the renewing of your mind. By the renewing of your mind. Another way you put it is renew equals restore. How many of you guys have ever restored anything in your life? A couple of you? Yeah. I've never restored a car, but I know enough to know that first off, restoring something takes a lot of work, doesn't it? It takes a lot of time, and it takes getting your hands a little bit dirty. And when you restore something, what you have to do first is you have to take off the old before you can put on the new, right? When you restore a car, you have to sandblast all the old paint off, and then you've got to Bondo all the cracks and crevices, and then you have to grind it and get it in preparation before you can put the new paint on. And if you put the new paint on before you do the hard work and before you take the steps, what ends up happening? The paint peels off, right? And the paint will chip and it'll look even worse than it did before. It's kind of like if you have a lust problem and you try to fix it by porn. That's just a temporary satisfaction, and actually that will damage you even more. If you have a discontentment issue, getting a new job, moving to a new city doesn't help. You're just prolonging the real issue. If you have a money problem, a greed problem, getting more money, getting a raise doesn't do anything because it's mo money, mo problems, right? And the list goes on. And so what Paul says is, hey, you need to restore you. You need to renew your mind. And renewing your mind, it takes some hard work. And it takes getting your hands a little bit dirty. And in the process of it, it's not very fun. When you're restoring a car, that's not very fun. And when you're in the process of restoring your mind, of renewing your mind, sometimes it can look a little bit ugly, right? It's kind of like when you're storing a car and in the middle of it, it doesn't look very nice. It doesn't look very appealing. People can look at it and kind of have these frown faces. And that's what Paul's kind of saying. You've got to renew your mind, restore your mind. And the reason that I think Paul is so brilliant is this, because what Paul is suggesting is that we have to begin to think differently. We have to renew our mind. What Paul is saying is that we have to rewire our brain. This is the reason I think Paul is so brilliant, because what Paul understood some 2,000 years ago was that God and science are not exclusive, but actually that God and science go hand in hand. And Paul is saying, hey, you need to rewire your brain. And what scientists have understood now is that the brain is amazingly changeable, and that we can actually rewire our brain, that we can think differently. And that what scientists have discovered is that we have something in our brain called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity changes our neural pathways that then changes the way that we think. And when we change the way that we think, it changes our actions and our behaviors and our decisions and choices. What Paul understood some 2,000 years ago, sure, he didn't put a name to it. Sure, he didn't fully understand neuroplasticity. But what Paul understood was that we could rewire our brains, that we could think differently, that we can literally change our mind. And then this is what Paul says next. He says, Then once you do the hard work, then once you rewire your brain, then once you get your hands dirty, then once you take the time to renew your mind, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. If you follow God, don't you want to know what God's plan for your life is? Yeah, I think even if you don't follow God, maybe you're a theist, someone that believes in a God, higher power, but the whole Jesus church thing, it's a little bit confusing for you. And you look at all the different religions and opinions out there, and you're like, I'm out, like too much for me. Don't you, though, even want to know what God's plan for your life is? Sure you do. I think we all do. And what Paul says is that if we do some hard work, if we stop drifting about in life, that if we begin to renew our mind, if we think differently, if we restore ourselves, then we'll actually discover what God's good and pleasing and perfect plan for our life is. That if we actually attune our thinking to his thinking, then you'll become the you that you want to be and the you that you were created and designed to be. And that is God's invitation to you and to me. And so now the question is this, okay, so how do you rewire your brain? How do you renew your mind? How do you not be a conformer, but be a transformer? How do you make sure that next time is better than last time? How's we want some answers. How do you begin to think differently and rewire your brain? And the last 6 months, I've been working on this personally. And the last 6 months, I've been working on renewing my mind, and I'm nowhere close to where I need to be. I have a long ways to go. But I am making some progress. And throughout the last 6 months, I've made 4 observations that I would love to share with you. And these are not my observations. I've took these from other people, but I have found them extremely helpful and insightful to me with rewiring my brain and renewing my mind. And so I'd love to share those with you this morning. So 4 observations about renewing and rewriting your brain. Observation number 1, breathing deep. This is one of those, to be honest, this is one of those I did not want to have be on my observation list to you. I did not want to share it to you because it sounds weird, right? Especially in a church setting, you're like, really? You're going to tell me to breathe deep in a church? Yeah. You're like, really, Caleb, breathe deep. That's what your second grade teacher told you to do when you were, throwing these hissy fits, was breathe deep. But seriously, what I've been learning to do is every time I get anxious, every time I get anxiety about the past or anxiety about a future relationship, I get jealous about something going on, I take a step back and take a couple big, deep breaths. And there's a bunch of science and study and research behind it, and I won't bore you with that. But once again, I think like science and God, they go such hand in hand. And it's basically what the studies and research say is that when we breathe deep, we're releasing toxins out of our body. That we're releasing the emotional stress and anxiety out and pain out of us. And that when we breathe deep and we let those toxins and stress and anxiety out, we begin to think clearly and calmly. And in order for us to renew our mind and rewire our brain, we have to think calmly and we have to think clearly. And then observation number 2, journaling. Another one of those, I was like, really? I don't want to tell everyone this, but journaling. Very helpful. And if you're a guy, you're like, really, Caleb, you're telling me to journal? You're like, that's a little too gushy for me. Like, that is not very macho. And I'm with you on that. And if that's where you're at, then don't tell anyone you journal or you breathe deep. Like, you can just keep that to yourself. Like, I'm okay with that. Now, of course, you all know that I breathe deep and journal, so don't hold that against me. But seriously, keep it to yourself. That's okay. And you're like, I'm not going to carry like a pocket book that says like my journal. Like that would look like, right? Like people would judge me. That's fine. I journal on my phone, actually. I love technology, so this is easy and convenient for me. But what I began doing is trying to get in the habit of once a day really vomiting my thoughts and my emotions and the things that I'm thinking, writing them down. And when you write them down, you're able to clearly articulate what you're thinking and why you're thinking that way. And then once it's out there, you can then take a look at it again, and it's really helpful to give you some insight. And even these last couple of months of looking back at my journals in February and January, just being able to see some progress that I've made, and then also some things where I'm like, haven't made any progress on that. Got a long ways to go. And then observation number 3, and could not tell you how important I think this one is, get outside help. The day my plane landed, I called a friend, knew he had been seeing a therapist, and said, hey, I need their number. I need to get some outside help. And understanding that there are people out there that know a whole lot more about the brain and emotional stuff than I do. And so beginning to process some of the past things that have happened to me, some of the past experience and choices and decisions and future stuff, and having someone to be able to process and talk with and give me some fresh insight to that have been extremely helpful. It's been worth all the money and the time spent on that. And quite frankly, some of you, that's where you're at. The next step for you is getting some outside help and getting some insight into your life. Some of you, quite frankly, you've had some messy stuff that has happened to you. Maybe as a child, what someone did to you. Some of you just got out of a relationship that you don't know if you'll ever be able to recover from. And your mind right now is just going crazy. And some of you need to process that with some people. And what I would love for you to know is that we as a church, we as a staff, we as Narrate, desire to get well, and we desire you to get well. And that we're not too proud, we're not too uppity, that we don't want to over-spiritualize some things in your life that you need to go and get some help. And you need to process with a professional, with a therapist. And that we would love to resource you to people in the community that are brilliant people that would love to talk with you about some stuff that you've been going through, some stuff that has happened to you. And then they can give you some tools and insight to your life. and begin restoration and rewiring your brain. And then number 4, asking God to search you. And the whole process when you're rewiring your brain and when you're renewing your mind, first off, it's a constant journey, and you continually are going to have to work on it. But in the whole process, I've constantly have had to go back to God and say, God, can you search me on this? Is this healthy? Is this unhealthy? And I've constantly have had to go back to Psalms where it says, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Constantly having to go back to God and say, God, search me on this. Bring up some things that I need to see in my life. Test me. Is this healthy? Is this unhealthy? And know that when you take the time, when you do the hard work to renew your mind and rewire your brain, it's worth the effort. And you'll begin to see God in a whole new way. And you'll end up not being a conformer, but a transformer. And you'll begin to stop drifting about in your life. And next time will be better than last time. So I don't know where this lands for you this morning. Some of you are at a spot in your life where you don't like where you're at. In fact, you don't like you. My hope, my prayer for you, and no matter who you are, where you're at in life, no matter the decisions, the choices that you've made, that you haven't made, no matter if you've been following Jesus for 20 years or this is the first time you've ever stepped foot in a church, that you would know that when you begin to think differently, when you do some hard work and you renew your mind, you'll discover the you that you were created to be and the you that you were designed to be. That when you rewire your brain and begin to think differently and attune your thinking to God's thinking, you'll create a life that doesn't just look good on the outside, but a life that actually feels good on the inside. And you'll discover what God's good and pleasing and perfect plan for your life is. And that's why God sent his son, Jesus, to die on the cross to take our brokenness so that way we could begin to think differently.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.